All right, welcome to this is section 3, part 2, and we're going to pick up exactly where we left off, and we're going to be talking about the differences between the Greek Septuagint and the Jewish Masoretic. Okay, and overall, so our oldest Jewish Masoretic manuscript is coming from the 10th century. This is the most complete Leningrad Codex. Okay, you also have the Aleppo Codex, which was a lot of it was destroyed. And then we have the Greek Septuagint left to us by the Roman churches, and going back to the 4th century. So this is really, the Jewish Masoretic is really the Bible of the Pharisees. This is the Bible passed down to us by the guys who crucified Jesus. And the Greek Septuagint is really left to us by more or less the followers of Jesus, the Jews who became Christians and were absorbed into the Roman Empire. So we're going to start off with the height of Goliath. We're going to notice a big difference between the heights that are given, and to me this really changes the whole story of the Bible. And again, the Greek Septuagint is going to give us a very realistic height for Goliath. Then we're going to move to differences in the genealogies, and this is where I think it gets pretty interesting. We're going to talk about how many people went into Egypt and the differences there, and how long was Israel in Egypt. And then we're going to go over the history of Abraham. And I want you to understand that as we go through the Jewish Masoretic, if you're a King James onlyist, this applies to you. So any problems we find in the Jewish Masoretic, this is going to affect your King James only Bible. All right, so let's start with the height of Goliath. And right away, what we're going to notice is the Greek Septuagint is saying that Goliath was 4 cubits and a span, and the Jewish Masoretic is saying Goliath was 6 cubits and a span. And this is a huge difference. So we're gonna read from the Apostolic Bible, the Greek Septuagint, and again, this is a very literal translation, and I'm just going to read it so you can understand what I mean by a very literal translation. And it says, "And there came forth man a mighty from out of the battle array of the Philistines. Goliath was the name to him, from Gath. His height was 4 cubits and a span." Now we're going to come to the Jewish Masoretic. This is the King James translation. And you're going to notice it's a little more polished. It's a slightly cleaner translation. It's not literally translated. "And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." So again, 4 cubits and a span, 6 cubits and a span. And to give you an idea of what that means is, if we were to convert that into inches, 81 inches, 6 feet 9 inches, or 206 centimeters for those of you who are metric, and versus 6 cubits, which is 117 inches tall, 9 foot 9, or 274 centimeters. So this is a world of difference. All right, so when I say cubit, generally the ancient cubit was, and there was a slight difference between the Egyptian cubit and maybe the Israelite cubit, but not by much. It's generally the tip of a man's finger to his elbow, and a span would be if you were to stretch out your thumb to your pinky. So this is generally 9 inches. This is generally 18 inches. All right. So there's quite a huge difference. The Septuagint is pretty much just saying that Goliath was the size of like an NBA superstar, right? Or not even. Some NBA players are a little shorter than this. Actually, let's take a look at the tallest man in the world. And the tallest man in the world right now is about 8 foot 3 inches, or maybe 8 foot 4 inches, and it's 251 centimeters. And what do you generally notice about these guys that are this tall? They're not healthy. They have heart problems. They can't walk properly. Look at this man. He needs a cane to walk, and I actually think he walks with 2 canes. So generally, my favorite wrestler growing up was a guy named Andre the Giant. And I really loved Andre the Giant. He died fairly young, and he had severe heart problems. So while he was an athlete, he wasn't very good. He was big and he was strong, but he wasn't very healthy. So ideally, a guy from the NBA, or maybe a football player, rugby player, these guys generally make good fighters, good warriors. So here's an idea. Let's try to visualize what we're talking about here. So the average man at the time of the Exodus was about 5'6" or 168 centimeters. I use imperial. I'm from Canada, and we're a mix of metric and imperial. I'm not very familiar with doing height in centimeters or weights in kilograms. Canada's kind of a mixture. We drive in kilometers. We do our height in imperial. We weigh ourselves in pounds. I cook in Fahrenheit, but I check my weather in Celsius. So I'm kind of messed up. Canada's a mixture of the two, and Canadians are kind of messed up when it comes to. So I'm just going to use imperial just because I'm used to it, but I did put centimeters there for people who use the metric system. And yeah, I'm aware the metric system makes more sense, but I use imperial. So what we're looking at here this is Goliath in the Septuagint, and this would be the average man. And King David fighting Goliath. King David was probably tall. The Bible records King Saul as a fairly tall guy. And King Saul, offered his armor to David. So it kind of hints that David must have been a pretty big guy. If Saul was really tall and David could wear his armor, then perhaps David was also a tall guy. So this is an average guy. David and Saul probably would have been closer to 6 feet tall. But Goliath is this is the size of an average NBA player. And again, lots of guys in the NBA are taller than Goliath. There's lots of guys in the NBA the same height as Goliath, so I think it's versus the Jewish Bible here saying Goliath is 9'9", compared to the tallest man in the world, who we know is not healthy. So again, the Jews teach that everyone in the Old Testament was Jewish. They don't separate Israelites from Jews, and they pretty much say us little Jews were killing people, almost 10 feet tall, great warriors this big. Well, the Septuagint brings us down to a very realistic height, guy, about the size of Shaquille O'Neal, guy you don't want to mess with, good athlete, and I think the Septuagint just gives us a way more down to earth. And I'll do a video on giants, because even the Greek word gigantes, giants, if you study Greek mythology, giants weren't tall people. They were known for being aggressive warriors who defied the gods. So whenever you see this word giant, it's a transliterated word. It's brought into the English language from Greek, and it doesn't necessarily mean a tall person. And we'll go through the Bible and debunk this idea that there were 10-foot tall warriors or 20-foot tall people. It's just folklore. It's paganism. It's polytheism mixed into the Bible. So again, Greek Bible, Jewish Bible, and you guys have to kind of decide for yourself what makes more sense to you. All right, so now we're going to look at differences in the genealogies, and we're going to start with the first 10 people. And at the top here, what we're looking at is the Septuagint numbers, and at the bottom here, you're going to have the Masoretic, the Jewish numbers. And when you're reading these, it's much different than when you visualize. When you're reading, okay, you might catch on, okay, there's a difference here. Adam was 230 when Seth was born. But at the Jewish Bible is saying he was 130 years. But if you notice, what they're doing is they're taking 100 years off the start of Adam's life, and then they're adding it to the end of Adam's life, right? And while it seems harmless, right, you add up both of these, they're going to equal to 930. That's fairly innocent, right, when you're reading it. But let's visualize it, and let's look what happens now. Seth too, right, 912 years. So notice what the Masoretic is doing here. It's by removing the 100 years and then adding it to the end, it's pushing history over. As the Septuagint's pushing us further in time, the Masoretic is pushing time backwards. So you have this huge difference. You're going to notice that it's going to change the flood. When did the flood happen? So all of history is completely rewritten just by the game that's being played with the changing the numbers. And you're going to notice, look at how inconsistent these numbers are. And we're going to see this later on when we get to the next 10 people. All right, so I just want to point this out. New Testament hidden in the Old Testament, like we talked about in the last video. If you were to take the name Adam, which means ruddy or red, but it also means man, And then Seth, right? Cain killed Abel, and so Seth was appointed to Adam as his new heir. Enos means mortal, Canaan means sorrow, etc. And if you were to just read the first 10 names and their translation, what we're going to get is man appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God descends or shall come down, teaching his death shall bring the despairing comfort. So hidden in the first 10 names of the Hebrew Bible, in their names translated from Hebrew to English, we get the plot of the New Testament. So again, hidden in the Old Testament is the New Testament, right? All right, so now let's just very quickly talk about lifespans in early civilization, because a lot of people, myself included, I had a real hard time coming to terms with, did people really live this long? And we're going to just look at Josephus here. And I agree with what Josephus is saying, and I kind of came to the same conclusion, was how did the civilization really explode? How did these people map out the stars? How is that possible? You know, I have my family tree going back to the founding of Canada, so I know the names of all the people it took to make me on my mother's side down to from when Canada was first founded to the late 1500s. And I'm going to tell you, there's 13 people between me and my, my great grandparents that came to Canada. And there's a lot of people that it actually took to make me. It's pretty mind-blowing when you go back 12, 13 generations. And if I didn't have this family tree, I would have absolutely no idea who I was related to. It's one of the greatest gifts I was given from my my grandparents was this family tree that has all my descendants. But how many of you guys know who your great grandparents were? What were their names? Where were they from? You know, even in the modern world, a lot of us are so disconnected from our families and our heritage, our history, just with a few generations. So how did these people map out the stars? Unbroken, right? So let's read, how did they discover geometry and architecture? So let's just kind of read what Josephus says here, and I agree with him. He says, God afforded them a longer time of life on account of their virtue and the good use they made of it in astronomical and geometrical discoveries, which would not have afforded the time of foretelling the periods of the stars unless they had lived 600 years, for the great year is completed in that interval. Right? And then what he goes to say is he confirms with the Greeks, the non-Greek speaking nations, right, the barbarian tribes, Manetho, who was an Egyptian historian, the Phoenician historians, and they all agree that in their histories that their ancestors originally did live this long period of time. So this isn't just a biblical view, this is just in general an ancient view. And I think that when you're going to have to do a trade-off. If you deny the people lived this long, that's fine, but you have to explain how unbroken you would realistically need between 24 and 30 generations, unbroken, of people passing down, disciplining their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, to have this unbroken knowledge that you have to continue studying the stars. And if we can't even remember who our great-great-great-grandparents are, how do you map out the stars without people living this long? And Josephus ends here, look, but as to these matters, let everyone look upon them as he thinks fit, okay? And that's what I would say to you. So I do now agree that people did live this long. It's the only way I can really explain some early civilization, how there was this explosion of knowledge that came into the world. And we'll see later on when we do the giant video, talk about giants, that the Sumerian kings also have people with the same lifespans. All right, so this is the standard Masoretic timeline. And this is just, I don't really know how they came up with it. This is just, they have the temple being built in 1000 BC. They have the Exodus happening during Ramesses in the New Kingdom era. It's a total mess. Don't take this seriously. This is just when you talk to mainstream Christians, they're going to tell you that the temple was built in this time. But let's not pay attention to this. We'll go over this later. For now, I only want you to focus on this section here. And what do you notice that's a little bit suspicious? You don't have this nice arc down. You have this choppy graph of when people are living and dying. And you notice that, Noah was 500, and he was 500 when Shem was born. Shem was 100 when Arphaxad or Arphaxad was born. And then all of a sudden, when you hit Arphaxad, you have this all of a sudden 35, 30, 34, 30, 32, and then you get down to closer to Abraham. Abraham's father was 70 when he had him. Abraham was 100. It now goes back to the beginning. But in between here, there's a game being played. Something's wrong, and we're going to figure out why. So now let's compare that to the Septuagint. Now notice this nice clean arc, right? Let's look at this section here. Ignore this stuff. We'll go over it soon. And you're going to notice that the flood, everything, all of history really takes off after the flood. It's not like the Jewish Bible. And you have this nice clean arc all the way down to the Exodus and this very nice consistency. And you're going to notice the Jews removed, like they did, a little bit different. They just completely removed the 100 years off the beginning of their lives. Now, why would they do that? Okay, so that's the question. Why is the Jewish Bible so different? So let's examine this. And we're going to go to the Pharisees. We're going to go to Chabad.org, and we're going to have them explain to us what the Talmud teaches, right? So again, the Masoretic is coming from the people who crucified Christ, and we're going to read what the rabbis say and what the oral law says. All right, so you can go to Chabad.org, Abraham and the Talmud. Now let's go through this together. Very little is told in Chumash of Abraham's early life. Okay, Chumash is just the Torah. The Torah is written on a scroll on parchment. Chumash it just means Torah in book form. It's on pages, not on a scroll. Okay, so very little is told about Abraham's early life, except for a few hints here and there. Hardly anything is told in the Torah of the father of our nation until he was 75 years. Such an important event as Abraham's defiance of Nimrod, the king and leader of all the heathens and idol worshippers of his time, which led to Abraham's being thrown into a burning furnace, is only hinted in the Torah. Oh, very interesting. It's only hinted. The full story of this and other important events in Abraham's early life is only told by word of mouth from generation to generation until the details were finally recorded by the sages of the Talmud in various midrashim. All right, so where are we going to learn about Nimrod? And 99% of what you know about Nimrod comes from the Talmud. All right, so let's keep going here. Abraham was the 10th generation removed from Noah, being a direct descendant of Shem, Noah's son, the father of all the Semitic peoples. When Abraham was born, Shem was 390 years old, and his father Noah was 892 years old. Abraham was 58 years old when Noah died. These are important facts. Oh, interesting. For as we shall see later, Abraham spent many years in the house of Noah and Shem and received instruction from them. Thus he learned all the details about the flood from the very men who built the ark and survived the flood. Noah knew Methuselah for many hundreds of years, who in turn knew Adam for many hundreds of years, which means that Abraham received reliable information about everything that happened since the very first day of creation. Terah, Abraham's father, was the chief officer or minister of the first king mentioned in the Torah, the mighty king Nimrod of Babylon, also known by its former name, Shinar, and the land of the Chaldees or the Chaldeans. Terah was an idol worshiper like his king, and their chief god was the sun. We have already told you what a close brush with death Abraham had on the very night of his birth. For Nimrod's stargazers told the king that Terah's newly born son would one day be in danger to his throne. Nimrod ordered Terah to send him the baby to be put to death. Terah, however, outwitted the king. So here you can see that the Jews have crafted a very interesting story, very similar to Jesus. A star was seen, a baby was born, and the king wanted to kill the baby. So you have this, this is right out of the Talmud, all right? And so the point here is, according to the Jews, the Pharisees, that Abraham knew Shem, Noah, all these people. He was 58 years old. So that's why when you look at this chart, here's a black line here. Let's take a look at this. This is Abraham. And you're going to see, according to the Jewish Bible, Abraham knew all these people, right? And it's really sketchy. If you notice, Shem saw his son die. He saw his grandson die. It's just very inconsistent. You can see the inconsistency in the years here. Now let's compare that to the Septuagint. All right, so let's come here and let's look in this section and let's draw that black line from the birth of Abraham, and what do we notice? The Greek Septuagint says all these people were long dead for hundreds of years. Abraham never could have known Noah, Shem, Arphaxad. He didn't live during the time of Nimrod. It means the Greek Septuagint genealogy destroys the Jewish Talmud. All right? So in order for the Talmudic folklore to be true, the Jews had to change all the genealogies. Now how do we resolve this? Well, let's go to the Samaritan Pentateuch. And notice that the Samaritan Pentateuch is using a Septuagint genealogy. It's got the 100 years on all the people. The Jews removed these 100 years to move history backwards so that all their rabbinical folklore, all the lies taught by the Pharisees can become true, right? If they didn't change that, then Jews would know, oh, our rabbis are lying to us. None of this is real. We can't trust these rabbis. Right? Josephus, first century Levitical priest. Now there's a problem here, and we're going to cover this, the Josephus mystery. We're going to go through it later, but notice that down here, Josephus is he's adding the 100 years, he's using a genealogy similar to the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Greek Septuagint. All right? So what that means is these are in agreement, and they're against the Jewish Masoretic and the Talmud. Right? So this is why the Jews had to change all those genealogies. All right, so now let's take a look at the descendants of Israel. Is it 70 or 75? Okay, how many people went into Egypt with Jacob? All right, so the Greek Septuagint is going to give us this number, 5 and 70, 75 people. Now pay attention, all the souls coming forth from Jacob. It's very important. All right, Jewish Masoretic says all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. So we've got this is actually a big problem. And the reason this is a big problem is because when we come to the New Testament, what are we going to notice? Here's Stephen the martyr, and this is one of the most beautiful chapters in the whole Bible. And Stephen is pretty much on trial. The death of Stephen really kicks off the Christian persecution, and when the Jews decide we got to kill all these Christians. And Stephen gives a beautiful speech, and the Bible hints that God was speaking through him, that they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spake. And Jesus says that not to worry about what we're going to say when we're thrown in front of judges and kings and all of this stuff, because God, in that moment, in those hours, God will speak for us. God will put the words into us through his Spirit, and that's what God is doing with Stephen. So how could the Spirit of God be talking through Stephen when he doesn't have the correct number, right? So if you're a King James onlyist, you're in a lot of trouble here, because your New Testament is saying one number, and it's obviously, in my opinion, it's God speaking through Stephen to these Pharisees, and Stephen's using a Septuagint number. All right, so let's go over this. And now we're going to find a problem here, all right? Why does Moses contradict himself? And what do I mean by that? In Deuteronomy 10:22, in both the Septuagint and the Masoretic, what you're going to notice is Moses is saying 70 people, okay, went into Egypt. But notice the difference here. What's the difference? Did you catch it? This is talking about all the people that came out, the souls coming forth from Jacob. This is saying who went with him. And there's a big difference because now we have to add Joseph and his children, right? And you're going to notice these are two completely different systems of counting. How many people were in the caravan related to Jacob, to Israel, and how many in total of his, genetically like related to him went down. So we're going to find our answer in Genesis 46, okay? And the souls, all the souls entering with Jacob into Egypt, the ones coming forth from out of his thighs, separate from the wives of Jacob's sons. So not counting the wives of Jacob's children, so his sons' wives aren't counted. All souls were 66, and the sons of Joseph being born to him in the land of Egypt, 9 souls. All right, very interesting, and the total 75. But notice what the Jewish Masoretic's done is it's changed that. No, it's removing Joseph's sons and saying Joseph only had 2 sons, and then it's coming up with the same 70 and 70, okay? 70. If you don't know what a score is Old English, and it means 20. So 70 is 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 10, 70, all right? So we've got a problem here, a big problem. Now, how do we resolve this? All right. So, again, Deuteronomy 10:22 is saying 70 people. All right. So this says 70 people went into Egypt with Jacob, 66 children, plus his 3 wives, plus Jacob. All right. So that's what this is saying. Now, this is saying 70 people descended from Jacob were in Egypt, not counting Joseph, Jacob, and his sons' wives. That's how we get the number 75. But notice that in the Masoretic, it's 70 across the board, right? So if you're a King James onlyist, you're in a lot of trouble. Let me explain why. Okay, so the Masoretic is wrong, and now let's explain why. So again, Stephen is clearly quoting from a Septuagint, a Bible, could be a Hebrew Bible, but it agrees with the Greek Bible. It's in total disagreement to the Masoretic. In every spot in your Jewish Masoretic, you have 70 people. In the Greek Septuagint, you have 75, 75, and 70. And again, they're just different styles of counting. Okay, one's counting the descendants, one's counting the people. And realistically, there were probably 2,000 to 5,000 people in the tribe of Israel at this point. Okay, this is just his direct descendants. And let me explain. Let's go to the story of Abraham to explain what I mean by that. And when Abraham was going to war, okay, against Sodom and Gomorrah, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So what the Bible is saying is Abraham was within his house, within his own camp. People that Abraham is like, I don't want to say like a sheikh, but he's like a tribal leader. And he's got 318 fighting men, which means they probably have wives, they probably have children, there's old people. Abraham probably has 1,000 to 2,000 men and women and children under his command in total. All right? So now when you go in time to Isaac and then Jacob, who was 130 when he entered Egypt, how much do you think they multiplied? If Abraham probably has realistically 1,000 to 2,000 people at this time, realistically, let's just double that number. Between probably 4,000 to 5,000 people went into Egypt with Israel. So the house of Israel was huge when it went into Egypt. This is only counting the descendants, the direct descendants of Israel. And again, all right, when we go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found a Hebrew manuscript, a fragment, that confirms the Greek Septuagint that it says 75 people. So written in here, we actually have in Hebrew confirming the Greek Bible saying the Masoretic is wrong. The Jews must have changed their Bible to mean 70. all right? So how could the Spirit of God be talking through Stephen when he doesn't have the correct number? It's because the Jews changed their Masoretic so that it's 70 across the board. Stephen is clearly reading from a Septuagint or a Hebrew Bible like we saw from the Dead Sea Scroll fragment, all right? So if you're a King James onlyist, you have to explain, seeing this is something atheists bring up. I love atheists because the atheists ask the hard questions. And the reason atheists have a lot of problem and find a lot of inconsistencies in the scriptures is because of the changes that the Jews made. And now Stephen looks like an idiot quoting 75 people when really the Jews changed the Masoretic. And if you were just to use the Old Hebrew or the Greek Septuagint, then it makes perfect sense why Stephen is using this number. And if you're a Masoretic reader or if you're a King James onlyist, you're in a lot of trouble. Your God is the God of confusion. Your God can't do basic math, all right? And your answer is going to lie in switching your Bible translation. All right? So again, Abraham here, according to the Jewish Masoretic, Abraham lived to see all these people, and the Septuagint says no, all these people were dead. Again, look at the Septuagint. It's just this nice, clean, consistent arc all the way down to the Exodus. And all these people are dead by the time Abraham is born, and civilization picks up after the flood, right? Okay, so let's talk about the Exodus, time spent in Egypt, and notice a big difference here. And what's the difference? So let's read from the Septuagint. And the dwelling of the sons of Israel, which they dwelt in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, they and their fathers 430 years. And Masoretic, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. So notice the difference. The Septuagint is saying this 430-year period is divided between Egypt and Canaan, whereas the Masoretic is saying that no, the 430 years was only in Egypt. And this is a very big problem. If you're a King James onlyist, Masoretic reader, you're in a lot of trouble because we're just going to do some basic math here, literally 7-year-old math. And this is, again, why I love atheists, because atheists catch these things and the atheists go, your Bible doesn't make sense. But when we read the Septuagint, it's going to make perfect sense. So when we come to the story of the Bible, this is the differences. So here we've got our Jewish Masoretic, we've got our Septuagint, Samaritan Pentateuch, and Josephus in agreement. And so we have the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, and then we have this revolution called the Second Intermediate Period done by Semitics. Okay, Semitic kings, foreign kings known as the Hyksos, came and took over Egypt. All right? And if you're a Masoretic reader, this is where you have a problem, is because Exodus begins by talking about this revolution, this rebellion. And so this revolution obviously happened here when the Israelites were already in Egypt. The Masoretic, right, this whole revolution is just bypassed. It is mentioned at the beginning of Exodus, but my point is that there's this revolution, they're overthrown, and then the Exodus happens under Ramesses in the New Kingdom era. And that doesn't make any sense, right? So this is the fall of Egypt, right? Foreigners were ruling Egypt. And again, Isaiah says here, "For thus saith the Lord, my people went down aforetime into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause." And this doesn't translate, when you translate this literally using the Septuagint, it doesn't quite say this. It can say this, but it's not translated, again, it's a very literal translation. So the Septuagint kind of butchers this verse. But almost every Bible translation will say that it was an Assyrian who persecuted the children of Israel. So we have Semites persecuting the Israelites, and that couldn't have been in the New Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom. It could have only been during the period of the Hyksos, all right? So let's go through this a little bit closer. 215 years or 430 years, Israel and Egypt. Let's talk about this. Now, luckily, the Bible gives us a lot of great clues, and it's all mapped out for us. Let's go to the New Testament. And what the Apostle Paul is saying in Galatians 3:16 to 17 is this. To Abraham and his seed were the promises made. Okay, and then he goes to say, I say that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law, which was 430 years. So what Paul's pretty much saying, he's saying from the time of Abraham to the time of the law was 430 years. And that matches the Greek Septuagint, right? So here we've got Abraham entering Canaan, okay, at 75 years old. Isaac is then born 25 years later. 60 years later, Jacob is born. And 130 years later, Jacob enters Egypt. That gives us a total of 215 years. Perfectly. 215 years in Canaan. And now, when we read Josephus, he's going to agree, okay, 430 years after our father Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Jacob removed into Egypt. It was the 80th year of the age of Moses. So when did the Exodus, when did the law come, and when did the Exodus happen? Moses was 80 years old. They spent 40 years in the wilderness, and Moses died at 120 on a mountain in Moab. Never stepped foot in the Holy Land. So we know that between Jacob and the law, there's 215 years. All right? Now, this is the basic math I'm talking about. So if you're a King James onlyist or you're a Masoretic reader, you're in a lot of trouble. Your God is the God of confusion. And this is why I like atheists, because atheists call us out on this, and the atheist forces us to study and search for answers. Okay? So, we know that Jacob was 130 when he entered Egypt. We know Levi was born in Syria. He wasn't even born in Canaan. He was born very young in Israel's life, in Jacob's life. Kohath, we know, also wasn't born in Egypt. But you know what? For argument's sake, even though the Bible's clearly telling us Kohath was born probably in Canaan, he wasn't born in Egypt, let's give the King James onlyist and the Masoretic readers, let's give them Kohath. Let's just give them to them, right? So Kohath was 133. Let's add Amram. Let's add Moses. That's 350 years. So if they're saying that at 430 years, you can't, it's the King James and Masoretic are mathematically impossible. Guys, this is 7-year-old math. A 7-year-old can do the math here and go, well, they couldn't have been in Egypt for 430 years because these people just, you're missing 65 years off these people. And again, Kohath was probably already a grown man when they entered Egypt. This is us being generous and giving them Kohath. So very basic math. Your Masoretic is wrong. Your King James Bible is wrong. If you can mathematically explain to me this, that would be great. But as far as it stands, the Septuagint has the answer. All right, so that is how I look at the time spent in Egypt. We have to go to the Greek Septuagint. All right, so this is where both translations, I think, get it wrong. And this is an example, I would say, of like Tempus et Historia. This is where we have to consider the time in which things were written and look at advantages we have in the modern world. And one of the advantages we have in the modern world is we can speak ancient Egyptian. And we're going to look at this word abrek, and I've talked about this before. And what I love about the King James translators is how honest they are, that they had no idea what this word meant, that it's probably an Egyptian word. And you're going to notice that the King James translators were very honest. It's these King James onlyists that have created this mythology, this lie, that their Bible is the perfect word of God with no mistakes, which just very basic mathematics proves them wrong. And this word abrek is also going to prove another mistake in the King James Bible and in the Septuagint. Okay? And what I love is that they're honest enough to say, you know, we couldn't figure it out. It's probably an Egyptian word because this word abrek means absolutely nothing in ancient Hebrew. All right. So let's take a look at the two translations. And Pharaoh removed the ring from his hand, put it upon the hand of Joseph, and he put on him apparel fine linen, again, very literal translation, and 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 he put a collar of gold about his neck, and he transported him upon chariot second his, and proclaimed in front of him a herald. Now notice it's in brackets because they have no idea what this word means. This is what they're guessing. And the reason they're guessing that is because we're going to see why when we go to the Masoretic. And he placed him over the entire land of Egypt. So Joseph is now being made the prime minister. Now let's read the Masoretic, and this is the King James, so it's a cleaner translation. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee. This is Abrek. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. Okay, now this is number one thing that's fascinating is this matches the time when chariots and horses were being introduced into Egypt. And this is perfect Egyptian customs. Pharaoh would give his viziers a ring, a signet ring, that he could stamp things with, and a gold chain to signify his power. And so here we have the word abrek, and again, the King James translators were honest. We don't know what it means. It's probably ancient Egyptian, right? So they cried before him. Who's doing the crying? The people are crying. What are the people crying? Why would the people cry, bow the knee? It doesn't make any sense. So that's why in the Septuagint they added this, proclaimed in front of him a herald. So as if they've got, well, there's some guy, you know, there must be some guy in front of the chariot announcing stuff. So in my opinion, both these translations are wrong. And we're going to have to go to exactly what the translators think. Maybe it's Egyptian. So let's go to ancient Egyptian to figure this out. And here we have, let's break down this word, abrek, 3 ancient Egyptian words. And now I learned this from my favorite Egyptologist is a man named Dr. Bob Breyer. And he was really my teacher on ancient Egypt. And I absolutely love this man, mainly because I didn't like ancient Egyptian history. And I love history, I just couldn't get into ancient Egypt. I loved Roman history, I loved Greek history, I loved the American Civil War, I loved all these other, you know, medieval history, Henry V, stuff like that. You know, I love Shakespeare, but I just couldn't get into ancient Egyptian history. And Dr. Bob Breyer was the only man in the world that had the power to make me fall in love with ancient Egypt. And that's the sign of a good teacher. A sign of a good teacher isn't a guy who just teaches you. It's a guy who makes you fall in love with the subject, whether it's music, whether it's art, whatever you're studying. A good teacher makes you love the subject so that you want to research it on your own, right? And that's the sign of a good teacher. And that's why I absolutely love Dr. Bob Breyer. He's really one of my heroes, just because of his knowledge and how well he teaches. So almost anything I teach you, 90% of what I teach you about ancient Egypt is because of Dr. Bob Breyer, who's not a Christian, but phenomenal teacher, and he's extremely well versed in the Bible. I've had some discussions with him, and that guy knows his Bible. All right, so let's translate this using ancient Egyptian. Again, we have the word abrek, and you can break it down into 3 words, ib or ab. They're not sure which one it is. All right, and it means heart. And there's 2 words in ancient Egyptian for heart, ib or ab. And this is just more like heart, like, then there's a medical one. I think the word is hot. And that is the medical word in ancient Egyptian for the word heart. And I think they used to put the hearts in pots. Like the organs, I think, would go into pots or something like this. And I think that's why you have a pot here. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's why it's a pot. And then we have R. okay, which means to. It's a preposition to. And then we have the K, which means you. So together, abrik means, in ancient Egyptian, our hearts to you. So I want you to think how beautiful that is, that he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and the people, they cried before him, our hearts to you, as if they're loving Joseph, because Joseph just interpreted Pharaoh's dream and just saved all their lives. And they're showing their love and their appreciation if we just translate this using ancient Egyptian. And when the Septuagint was being written, understand that it's Greek Ptolemaic Egypt, Greek Egypt, and this history, this is already long gone ancient history. So what this is saying is that whoever wrote the book of Genesis, Moses, is someone who was in ancient Egypt. That's the only way this word could have shown up, and then we forgot it, and only now in the modern world that we now understand and deciphered ancient Egyptian can we now make sense of what the Bible might actually be telling us. And to me, I agree with it. I love this translation, and I think both the Septuagint and Masoretic have it wrong. And unless we can break free from this mindset that, oh, the Bible's got no mistakes or nothing, you're going to miss out on all this, I think, really beautiful stuff. And I think in the next 100 years, the Bible's really going to transform. All right, let's talk about some ancient Egyptian customs. And I just love this. This doesn't really have anything to do with with our topic, but Dr. Bob Breyer was the first man since the days of ancient Egypt to actually mummify a body. And he had a lot of problems. And he tried to do it using the original tools, handcrafted, just like they crafted in Egypt. He did it all natural. And he couldn't cut through the body when he had the Egyptian bronze knives. They just didn't do anything. And then he studied Herodotus, and he studied the section of Herodotus where he's talking about the Egyptian procedures on mummifying and embalming a body. And he noticed that the Egyptians were using an Ethiopian stone to make their incisions, right? And what that is, it's an obsidian blade, right? And that's what the Egyptian doctors and priests would use for surgeries and for mummification, right? So this isn't just good for killing White Walkers and the army of the dead. This is also what was used for the ancient Egyptian, field of medicine. And when we come to the book of Exodus, Zipporah, the wife of Moses, okay, and she was a Midianite. She wasn't an Israelite. She was a Midianite. She wasn't. So Moses' children were not born of an Israelite woman. Zipporah, taking a small sharp stone, circumcised the foreskin of her sons. And I, used to go, that's not possible. You can't circumcise someone with a stone. This is not right. And an atheist would point that out too, but when you study Herodotus and you understand that obsidian blades, obsidian glass, are 500 to 1,000 times sharper than our steel surgical blades today. And I really want you to think about that. That's mind-blowing. So these are extremely sharp, much sharper than our surgical blades today. And to me, this is perfect history. The Bible is leaving us great clues that only someone from ancient Egypt would have actually known. All right. Another custom is Israel. Jacob was embalmed, and when the physicians embalmed Israel, right, 40 days, and then the mourning period, it comes to a total of 70 days, 70 days. This is perfect ancient Egyptian history. All right. So overall differences, I want you to just really look at the difference between the history, creation, between the two Bibles. There's almost a 1,500-year gap. The Jews removed 1,500 years more from their Bible. All right, so all of history is completely rewritten. You could see the flood happened at a way different date. Everything has changed from these two Bibles. All right, so anyone says, oh, there's not big differences. No, the Jews made a lot of changes, and all of history is rewritten. All right. Let's look at the history of Abraham, and this is very fascinating. And we're going to read secular sources. So we're going to read the Bible after. Let's just look at what secular historians are saying about this time. So Abraham would have lived at about 2000 BC. And notice who's ruling the world at this point, at this period, according to secular historians? The third dynasty of okay? Also known as the Neo-Sumerian Empire. So the third dynasty of is commonly abbreviated as III by historians studying the period. The third dynasty of was the last Sumerian dynasty which came to prominent power in Mesopotamia. It began after several centuries of control exerted first by the Akkadian Empire. This is the Semitic conquest. Let's keep going. All right, so in the 21st century, Ibn Sina launched military campaigns into Elam, but did not manage to penetrate far into the country. So then the Elamites formed an alliance from Susa. Now we talked about the Elamites, and this is where the Persians come from, right? This is where Cyrus the Great's going to come from. Susa, right? This is going to become the administrative capital in the Persian Empire. And so the Elamites are going to strike back. And after this victory, the Elamites destroyed the kingdom and ruled through military occupation for the next 21 years. Mesopotamia then fell under Amorite influence. This is very important. Pay attention to that. They managed to drive the Elamites out of rebuilt the city, and returned the statue of Nana that the Elamites had plundered. But then look what happens. Much of southern Mesopotamia was occupied by the Amorites. All right, so let's keep going. What does the Bible say? The exact same thing. Abraham was coming out of of the Chaldeans, before he went into the land of Canaan. Who was ruling the world? It was the third dynasty of So the Bible is bang on. I don't know what the odds are. If it said anything else, this would be suspicious, but the Bible is nailing exactly who was ruling the world. That's the city where Abraham's coming out of. And then what does the Bible then say in the next couple chapters? It talks about Elamites. The king of the Elamites is now going to invade the land of Shinar, Babylon, destroy it, and then 12 years they served this Elamite king, and in the 13th year they rebelled. Almost exactly what secular historians have dug up. So this is perfect history. Now let's talk about the Amorites for a moment. This is Hammurabi is one of the greatest kings from ancient history, and if you're familiar with him, you know about the Hammurabi Code, right? So Hammurabi was the 6th Amorite king, so he's not really a Semitic king. He's an Amorite king ruling Semitic territory of the old Babylonian Empire, reigning from 1792 to 1750. Now what does the Bible say? God said to Abraham, "Know of a surety that thy seed shall be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years." All right. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. So he's talking about them being in Canaan and in Egypt. Afterwards shall they come out with great substance, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So Abraham's coming out of the land of the Chaldee of the 3rd dynasty of God is telling Abraham this before the Amorites have conquered and built their huge empire. And while the Israelites are in Egypt, when the Hyksos are actually taking over, before the Hyksos take over Egypt, Hammurabi, the Amorites are now ruling, and God is telling us that only when their sins, the sins of the Amorites, have come into full, will God bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. And what do we notice? Who are the Israelites fighting when they come into Canaan? They're fighting the Amorites. That's who they're overthrowing. And exactly when the Amorite empires fall is when the Israelites are removing them from power in the land of Canaan. All right, perfect history. All right, so let's look at this, just kind of compare the differences. Standard Masoretic timeline. So again, we have this really weird choppiness And notice the pyramids. This is the Narmer palette. This is the oldest artifact I think we have from ancient Egypt. And it's really about Narmer, who conquered Egypt and united the two kingdoms. And he's wearing the double crown, famous double crown of Egypt. And I just use this marker. It's a very important marker for me when I'm studying history. I just kind of use it. It's either from 3000 BC or 3200 BC, somewhere in between there. But notice that the flood is here, and the pyramids are built before the flood. The flood kind of just comes in the middle of the Old Kingdom and the Akkadians. It doesn't really make sense. And I don't believe in a global flood. I believe in a local flood in Mesopotamia up towards Armenia. Most people believe in a global flood, which for me, I just don't. You have so many different races on different continents, so many different languages, different blood types, different people, different animals. It doesn't make sense how, kangaroos are in Australia and nowhere else, and then llamas are in South America and nowhere else. If all the animals were in one spot, the animals would be, so for me, anyways, that's a whole other topic, but what you're going to notice is the pyramids are built before the flood, and when you look at the standard timeline, and I don't really know how they came up with this, I'm just using the markers. Like most, they'll say that the temple was built in about 1000 BC. The Exodus happened under Ramesses in the New Kingdom, and again, we know that this is mathematically impossible. And you're going to notice that Abraham is coming into Canaan after, not before the Ur is destroyed. He's coming in. He would have been in Ur for its destruction. And the Israelites, right, and the Amorite kingdom is already destroyed by the time the Israelites are coming in. So this doesn't make any sense. I don't even know how they got this, to be honest, but this is just using the temple marker, using when they say the Exodus happened, and it's just nothing makes sense. But notice this marker here. In 1 Kings 6:1, there is this temple marker, and for some reason the standard people just don't, I guess they're just not using it. But if you use this temple marker, it'll tell you that between the Exodus and the temple is 480 years. So now if we use the Masoretic with this temple marker, see, we've now added it, history gets pushed back. The Exodus, but again, this is mathematically impossible. You're not going to have these people in this 430-year period. Impossible. And the Exodus is actually happening when it should be. The Amorites are where they should be. But notice Abraham is now pushed back like 200 years before the fall of Ur. Ur doesn't even exist as a dynasty. Abraham is living in the time of the Akkadians. And Israel is entering Egypt before Ur falls. So, and actually with this one, the pyramids are built after the flood. But again, the Narmer palette is before the flood. So even with this marker, you have to choose, you have to sacrifice something. You either sacrifice the history of Abraham. Abraham is now completely thrown into the wrong time. This stuff becomes regulated, right? The Exodus is more or less, but again, mathematically impossible. So even with the temple marker, it doesn't make sense. Now, this is my own, I'm mixing secular history with Josephus, with the Bible. That's how I'm getting these markers. And again, with the Septuagint, we have this nice, clean arc right down to the Exodus. All these people are dead by the time Abraham is born. We have the Narmer palette after the flood, okay? And we have the pyramids after. Everything comes after the flood. It's just this nice. Now we have this Canaan highlighted because I actually think it's a scribal error, and even in the Septuagint, I don't think it should be here. So Josephus doesn't mention him. I don't think anyone from the early church fathers mention him. He's a very mysterious. I think it's just a scribal error. If you notice, this Canaan has the exact same years as his son, right? Salah. Exact same years, and he's the fourth down. And if you go to the first 10 people, you'll notice Canaan is also the fourth down. I think it's just a scribal error. But even if you remove him, you just move history over from left to right, and none of this has changed. So with the Septuagint, you get this nice clean arch down to the Exodus. Abraham, if you notice, he's entering Canaan exactly right before the Elamites destroy Ur. Israel is coming into Egypt during the Middle Kingdom. The Exodus is happening right before the Hyksos are finally overthrown by the true Egyptians. And then the Israelites enter Canaan, and that is the fall of the Amorite kingdom. And then, and the Amorites fall, we have the rise of Neo-Assyria, Neo-Babylon, Mycenaean Greece, and the Minoans were also overthrown, and that's when the Mycenaean Greeks took them over. Then we have Medo-Persia, the Greeks, the Romans, and then Christ, and then everyone becomes Christian. And I'm using this Josephus marker. And in Josephus says that between David and Titus, when Titus destroyed the temple, and David is 1,179 years. So the temple would have been built closer to 1100, not 1000 BC. All right, and we have Melchizedek. This is another person, and you're going to notice that it matches perfectly when Abraham was there. So the Septuagint just gives us a way cleaner, everything fits, everything can make sense, it's way more logical, and the Masoretic is just completely crazy, and it was all changed to compensate for all the lies from the Pharisees, from the guys who killed Christ. All right? Now this is the Josephus mystery, and I don't, if you want to pause it, see if you can catch the mystery. I noticed it when I was reading it. But what do you notice? Well, let me go through it. So Abraham, who accordingly was the 10th down from Noah, right? So if that Canaan was there, this would be wrong. Notice Canaan is not in this genealogy in Josephus. Canaan is missing here. So I don't think that Canaan should be here. But notice what Josephus says, that he was born in the 292nd year after the flood, after the deluge. Does that make any sense? And then he immediately gives a Septuagint genealogy. Now, why is this suspicious? Did you catch it? Let's do some basic math here. So Shem had Arphaxad or Arphaxad 12 years after the flood. Okay? And then Arphaxad, okay, he was 130 years old when Salah was born. Okay? And then, so we've got Septuagint numbers. So just the first four people, if we add up these numbers, we get a total of 411 years. Why on earth would Josephus, okay, who knows what he's talking about for the most part, he says, why did he have this verse here? And then immediately quote Septuagint numbers. What do you notice about this? These are Masoretic numbers. If you add up the Masoretic years, you get exactly 292 years. Why would Josephus write this and then immediately quote the Septuagint, which completely contradicts what he wrote here? This is insanity. The only thing I can think of is that someone went into Josephus and added this, and it disagrees with everything. So it's a very suspicious, I call it the Josephus mystery. We're going to see other mistranslations done in Josephus to hide the true temple location, okay? Where the Jews are praying right now is not the true temple. They're praying at the fortress of Antonia. It's the Roman fortress. That is not the Temple Mount. Jesus said not one stone would be left here unturned. They're praying at a wall that wasn't overturned. That's not the temple, all right? And there's a change made in the Josephus manuscript to hide the true location of the temple, all right? So the only thing that I can think of, why would Josephus write Masoretic, one line that backs up the Masoretic, but then immediately quote Septuagint numbers that contradict him? To me, it tells me this is added. Okay, it's the only thing I can think of. This is the Josephus mystery. Thought I'd just share that with you. All right, so let's come to an end now. I just want to, again, reiterate that when you're reading these manuscripts, understand that, and, ancient Roman or whatever, understand they don't have the numerical system we have, or the number 0. We live in such a blessed time where we separate numbers from letters in such a magical way that just didn't exist in the ancient world. So when you're reading these manuscripts, they're brutal. Okay, there's no spaces, there's no grammar laws, there's no spelling laws. It's you just everyone just wrote how they thought the word was spelled. There's no punctuation, there's nothing. And numbers are letters, and that's just what I want to point out. So if you're looking at like in Hebrew, the Dalet and the Resh, they look very similar. There could be a mistake, so the number can very well change from 4 to 200. All right? So I just want to just tempus et historia, really be thankful to God that we have the number systems that we have today, and that we don't do math like this in the ancient world, and that we have grammar laws, we have punctuation, we have all that great stuff. All right? So I just want you to kind of be thankful that we don't have to tell time and do numbers with this crazy letter numerical system. All right? So again, let's just end. Again, I just want to reiterate again how beautiful that all our manuscripts are preserved in all the great empires from the Bible. Aramaic, Hebrew, showing us the Israelites were captives in Babylon. Phoenician, Paleo-Hebrew, we have that. The Egyptian language is preserved. Thank God we have the Coptic Bible that preserves the ancient Egyptian language in the Greek alphabet. We have Syriac, Imperial Aramaic, ancient Greek, and ancient Latin. So I'm very thankful to God that these are the manuscripts we have telling the same story without telling the story. Just the languages on their own, Let's end on eternal hell. And I just want to talk about this because this question comes up a lot. And I don't believe in eternal hell at all. I believe in a very merciful, loving God. And we're just going to read some Paul here. And I do believe that Christ came to save everybody. And I just believe that the people who forfeit their lives to God, okay, are rewarded for that forfeit. When you choose, when you realize that your life isn't yours, that God loved you so much that God wrote you into existence, and that your life truly belongs to Him. Every breath you take, every day you live is a gift from God. And it's a very beautiful thing for someone to acknowledge that and then turn around and say, you know what, God, this life you gave me, it's actually not mine, it's yours. And you take this gift that God gave you and you turn around and give it right back to Him. And there's a reward for that, right? And I think for the most part, we don't choose God. It's God that chooses us, right? And our whole world is dependent on sinners. Our whole world is dependent on bad people. Without the bad, there is no good. Without injustice, we can't have justice. Without darkness, there just is no light. How do you understand these things? So I'm very thankful that God, built the world like this. And yeah, there's a lot of confusion. I'm also glad that we have, we don't have a master Bible, an original Bible. We have copies of copies of copies, and they don't agree, and it's just this big mystery left for us to solve. And then I just think, how boring would life be if all the answers were given to us? Everything was handed to us. You need that struggle, you need that sacrifice, you need that work, and I just, I really believe in an all-loving God, and without Pharaoh, there is no Exodus. Without the Pharisees and Judas, there is no crucifixion. The whole narrative of the Bible is dependent on evil people. And I do believe that Jesus came to baptize in fire everyone. Let's just read Paul, and I hope this will at least convince you to research, hell a little bit more. And again, hell is the Norse goddess of the underworld, as Hades is the Greek god of the underworld. And let's just read Paul, and Paul says, "Every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he has built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." Say, fire is there to save you. It's there to cleanse you. The lake of fire is where sinners go to be baptized. So understand that people who didn't know Christ or were born on the other side of the world, when they die, they're not going to burn in hell forever because there was no chance for them to know Jesus. They're going to be judged according to their lives, their works. And the fire, whatever guilt they have, will be purged in that fire so that they can be made righteous to be with God and live with God. So try not to stress so much about, your loved ones who haven't come to Christ. Be calm, be cool, and let them just come to Christ over time. Let them see it in you. I saw there was a woman who killed all her children because she rationalized, and I want you to think about this, she killed 4 of her children, young children under 6 or under 8, 4 of them. And she went, you know what? I might be a murderer, but all my kids are in heaven because they didn't grow old enough. They're innocent in the eyes of God. So I don't care if I go to hell forever and that I murdered my children because I saved them from eternal hellfire. Chances are they were going to grow up to be bad people, and I spared them from that. So if you believe in this eternal hell doctrine, then you should also agree with what this woman did, right? Which is, to me, absolute insanity, right? But technically, if you believe that you're going to burn in hell forever and that God is this psychopath who made us all flawed, admits he created evil, admits he made us all flawed, and then he's going to barbecue us in eternity. You listen to these Christians tell their fear stories, their fear-mongering about, I died and I saw hell and I saw Hitler there and all this stuff. All the demons torturing you. This is insanity, in my opinion, okay? Christ came to save mankind, right? And that's what we're going to see. John the Baptist says, I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he that cometh after me is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. With fire. Jesus is coming to baptize people in fire, and that's what the lake of fire is. The lake of fire burns eternally, but the sinners don't. All right? And when you read the Bible in Greek, it makes a lot more sense. Okay? So I don't buy this burning in hell for all eternity. And let's just look at the prodigal son. I want you to read this whole story on your own time. Luke 15, 11 to 32. It's this beautiful, beautiful story. I'll just kind of sum it up for you. So this father has 2 sons, and one of his sons does everything he says, listens to him, obeys him, works hard, all this stuff. And his other son is kind of a rebel. And he decides, I'm going to sell my inheritance. Dad, give me my inheritance now. Sells it off and goes parties with the sinners. He sells his inheritance. And then he ends up with nothing. Once he runs out of money, nobody wants to be his friend, and he ends up a servant in some guy's house as a slave, and the guy's feeding him, pig food, and he sleeps with the pigs, and his life is miserable. And this son eventually realizes, and he's like, the servants in my father's kingdom, in my father's house, are treated much better than this. I know I'm going to go back home and ask my father if I can be a servant in his house, in his kingdom. What does the father do? Does he throw his son into a forever barbecue? Does he say, no, son, you can't come home? No. The father orders the finest robes to be brought, golden rings to come to put on his son, orders the fattest calf, the best cow to be slaughtered, to be prepared for a feast, He doesn't disown his son. He's very loving and forgiving, and I think that's what God is at the end. And the other brother, the one who did everything right, notice he's like these Christians. Oh no, he's bad, he's wrong, I'm chosen. Dad, I did everything you said. I'm the chosen son. I'm great. Why? You've never done anything like this for me, Dad. Here's my piece of garbage brother coming back, and you've done all this great things. You've never slaughtered a cow like this for me. You've never covered me in robes. Why are you doing this for my sinful, evil brother? I'm the son who did everything you wanted. And what does the father say? And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Okay? You own everything I have. Your brother sold his inheritance. You get the kingdom. This is all yours because you listened to me. Okay? But it was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this day thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Okay? He's not kicked out. He's allowed to return home. He's rejoicing. The Father's rejoicing at his sinful son, who sold his inheritance to go live with the sinners, and he's rejoicing that his son who was dead is now alive. And I think that's what Paul means when he says people will be saved, yet so as by fire. As Christ will baptize in fire, the lake of fire is for sinners, so that we can be made righteous and clean to live with God, right? So that's how I look at things. Anyway, so we're going to end there. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed that. I have no idea when the next video will be done. Fortunately, my current circumstances aren't the greatest, but I hope you enjoyed that. There's a Telegram group. I'll link it in the description if you guys want to join and potentially stay in touch. And that's it. So whenever I get to pick up and carry on with this, we're going to move to composing a manuscript. And this is a very fascinating subject, and it will really help you understand why we don't have complete Bible manuscripts from the time of Jesus or Moses, and how it just matches the history. When you understand how hard and difficult and expensive it was, and the brutal history surrounding the Bible, you'll understand and have an appreciation for manuscripts and why we don't have any originals. All right. So again, hope you learned something, and I hope you guys are well.